Mr. Jim Clapper. Mr. Clapper is the parent of Bob, a gentleman who's 29 years old, diagnosed with Down syndrome, and happily working in a center-based DTNH 5 days per week. Bob has lived in an IHO, or Independent Individualized Housing Option, since May 2013, with 2 other young men with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And Mr. Clapper has been on the board of directors for another DTNH for many years and is currently their board chair. Early in 2015, Mr. Clapper organized an advocates group with other parents and guardians and family members of people who attended his son's DTNH, and the purpose of that group was to learn from the Minnesota Department of Human Services about things like the Olmstead Plan, the Home and Community-Based Services State Transition Plan, MIN Choices, and the DWRS, and empower the participants to then act on that information. And then from there, Mr. Clapper started working with a steering team to organize and scale up to what is now the new Minnesota Family Advocates Coalition, or MINFAC for short. And MINFAC's purpose is to connect all of the parent, guardian, family advocacy groups across the state and really mobilize people around changes affecting their loved ones. Their current priorities are to get this legislature to fix the major flaws in the DWRS, as well as to address the healthcare workforce crisis. MINFAC started this work this past spring. Please welcome Mr. Jim Clapper.
Well, it's good to see you here tonight. One correction. As of yesterday, I'm no longer the board chair for Midwest Special Services. Otherwise, everything else there was accurate. So I served many years with MSS, and then our bylaws require that after 2 successive terms, you take a year off, and they typically invite you back. So they extended, actually gave me a period of extra 2 years to be the board chair, so I think I deserve a year off from that, and hopefully can focus on MINFAC a bit more. But I appreciate that you're here to hear more about DWRS. I'm not going to make it too complicated. I'm going to try and just walk through what it is in a nutshell, but also talk a little bit about what we need to have parents do. If there was ever a time that you need to get a hold of your representatives, your senators, state senators, to write letters, to show up at the Capitol to a rally, whatever else, now is the time. It really is. This. As I'll explain in a little more detail, 2017 legislative session is really the last opportunity we have for the legislature to fix DWRS, and it needs to be fixed. It's really a mess. It's going to be very detrimental to what's going on with in the metropolitan area and also with center-based DTH programs, and I couldn't be more emphatic about the need for you to think about what you need to do. It's not in my comfort zone. I'm sure it's not in your comfort zone to do those things, but it's something we're going to have to really face up to. So anyway, let me just, I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm just going to walk through the handouts that you have, and we can certainly have any dialogue you want along the way, or you might want to wait until I'm done and come back and ask questions, because I might answer the question along the way. You should have received something that looks like, it says at the top, Disability Waiver Rate Setting, Facts and Realities, September 25th, 2016. I'm just going to walk down that sheet and talk about that one and give you some more references to that. First thing is in 2007, like it says there, this is right out of the DHS website, by the way, it's not made up. Most of what I picked up is from a lot of people, talking to people, a lot of reading, talking to DHS extensively, looking at their website, so I'm not making this stuff up. These are facts and realities that are around DWRS. But in 2007, Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services informed Minnesota, as well as many other states across the nation, that their rate setting, the rates that are contracted with the service providers for residential and also for day services, was out of compliance. And basically all they said, it needs to be a uniform rate determination methodology. We currently have, and it's been for some time, a method where each of the 87 counties has the prerogative to contract with rates with service providers in those counties locally, and it's very distributed. And that's what they said was out of compliance. That's no longer going to be acceptable, and that's the same case for other states across the nation. So that really was the first step in 2007 that started to create DWRS. And it applies to the 4 waivers that we talk about a lot: is CADI waiver, DD waiver, CAC waiver, and NBI waivers. Number 2, the DWRS provision was approved in 2013 legislative session. There was an omnibus bill passed in 2013 that authorized DHS to go ahead and create DWRS, Disability Waiver Rate Setting. And within that, then, they developed a rate methodology, a rate determination methodology that's standardized. It's a big algorithm, a very fancy formula. It's called RMS, Rate Management System. And none of the legislators, all the ones that I've talked to, never knew what was in that bill, at least to the degree that now we're seeing. So starting in 2013, and in that period up until, going through this period, RMS has been under development and being modified and changed and rolled out. And it finally, about a year ago or so, was available to interrogate, to give you rates by individual. That was one of the other provisions of DWRS that CMS wanted, is rates to be determined by individual, not by program. In other words, Merrick or Allied People Solutions or whatever all had their own rate based on their own internal needs and so forth, and that was the rate. Well, the rate is now based on individual rates coming in there, and then each of the service providers needs to aggregate those rates and see what their overall impact is going to be. So it's a total change in methodology of how rates are set, but that's how the game is played at this point. One of the provisions in DWRS was budget neutrality. It's a very important provision in there, that the budget neutrality would exist from a baseline of 2013. Budget neutrality meaning the state budget and what the funding was going to be going to rate management. And within that language, it's actually 256B.4914 if you want to read the detail, but it says by subcomponent it's also going to be budget neutral. The components, the main components, there's 4 buckets. I'm not going to get into the detail of it, but those are supposed to be neutral as well, or budget neutral as well from that baseline, which has turned out not to be the case, and we'll talk about that a bit more. The implementation of RMS basically is taking 5 years to do, and it does go into full implementation in the first part of 2019. That's the end of the 5-year period. During that 5-year period, there was some banding and insulating the effects of what was going to happen, and that's a 0.5 to 1% change per year, but it's basically just trying to smooth it out, keep it stabilized until finally it does go to where it's going to be in 2019. So that's why it's important for the 2017 session to act on it, because the 2017 session is a full budget year. 2018 is a supplemental budget year only. 2019 is a full budget year, but DWRS will have been implemented by then. So that's why 2017 is a real crucial year to have the legislature go back and see what they did in 2013, understand the ramifications of it, and hopefully decide that that's not what we had in mind. And budget neutrality must be observed by subcomponent as the original language stipulates, and we're not going to harm people with disabilities to the level that DWRS currently looks like it's going to do. So I'm going to reinforce that point a few times and hopefully you get that, but that's why it's so crucial that we do something, especially after the elections and after the Health and Human Services Committee gets going in December or January this next year, getting ready for the 2017 session. Okay, let's keep going. Number 4, DHS has published reports every 6 months about the impact. There's actually 2 reports in the back table. One is dated January of 2016, which is interesting, but even more interesting is what they published in July of 2016, which I don't believe is on the website. I've not found it on the website yet, but it talks about more or less what the impact is going to be, and that is also available on the back table. But I'll talk about some of the pieces of that so you know. There's 4 buckets, like I mentioned. There's a residential bucket for residential services, or the day services bucket, which covers all of the DTH and other programs like that. There's two other buckets I don't know very much about. I'm sure the experts in the room can help if we need to understand that. But it's basically unit services without programming and unit services with programming. But really, for the focus of tonight, we're kind of talking about the day services bucket, not the other three. But within that impact study, some interesting facts. One is that the day services bucket is going to see a decrease in funding based on what RMS is showing now, of about 9.2%. There's a caveat, they're going to have some exceptions, or assuming there's some exceptions in there, and it comes out to be more like a net 3.75% down. But when you talk about RMS and the big algorithm, that big formula, is stipulated very much in that Minnesota 256B, it correlates theoretically to that 9.2%. So the 9.2% is more important to think about more or less than the net that they're talking about in that paper. 9.2% is a really big number, and all of our DTHs that I know about, you know, they're nonprofits and so forth, they don't have that kind of margin, that kind of opportunity in their budget to handle that. There's several things that are wrong, and I talk about it down at number 5. A lot of the DTHs can't fit into some of the parameters that are being stipulated by RMS, and an example or two are in there. One is facility. Merrick is a good example. Midwest Special Services is another good example that I know very well. What they're putting in there to cover the facilities in those cases, from a rate standpoint, is just not what they have. America is a beautiful building. It's fairly new. It doesn't fit anywhere near close to what the stipulation is with the facility factors or facility rates within RMS. We've got, of our 6 centers of Midwest Special Services, we've got 2 fairly new centers that are somewhat designed according to our clientele there. One in Apple Valley is designed for a number of young men, or young people, I should say, with autism spectrum disorder, which does require some extra facility considerations. At this point in time, we've come back and said, the staff has come back and said, there's no way we can afford those 2 centers now. So we're actually contemplating having to move out of those 2 centers into something more basic, walking away from what we put there specifically for people with ASD, which is also frightening in the sense that it was designed for them and around them and really serves them very well, and now we're going to walk away from that. So there are several parameters, again, stipulated by 256B. The other one is another good example to talk about. It's called utilization. Basically, it says in the rates that they're going to assume a 97% utilization, which means presenteeism, that clients will average attendance and have presenteeism of 97%. Well, again, that's not realistic, especially if you think about the more medically fragile people. They're not going to attend more than 70 or 80% based on a number of reasons. Not to mention there are vacations people take once in a while and so forth, but 97% is untenable. It's not even close to being what the average utilization rate should be based on that scenario. There are other factors in there, and there's a couple other in there about staffing and so forth. Staffing wages are set from a 2009 threshold. That's the original numbers that are in there, to be updated every 5 years in the algorithm. You know, one of the reasons that we have a healthcare workforce shortage right now is based on the labor rates that are stipulated in DWRS. We've got over 9,000 openings across the state right now in the healthcare workforce community. We can't fill. It's just not there. So it's a crisis already. That's just going to exacerbate that situation. So again, there is structurally many things wrong with DWRS. So it's going to really not be palatable, or not going to be able to be worked with the service providers that we have out there. What's also interesting to me is what they're doing metropolitan counties versus outstate counties. And again, it's in that report, you can see it, but the metropolitan counties like Hennepin and Ramsey are seeing 6 to 7% reduction in rates across the board for all 4 buckets. You know, again, they've decided that there's too much money in metro and there's got to be more money pushed out to rural. And again, we don't understand the basic reasons for that. They're not explaining the rationale behind those things. I've asked repeatedly, why are these things in there? Why is day services going down by 9.2%? And I'm not getting any answers to that. They're not in a position right now they want to defend that. I think more is an organization that many, I think all three of you probably belong to. And they've had a committee that's working with DHS on it. I don't think they have any more explanation than we do about what was the principle, what's the fundamentals behind some of the decisions they made at RMS. And they're not willing to fix them either, to change them at this point in time. There's a wonderful resource, Lynn Noren in Moore, who knows a whole lot more than I do about it, but she says there's something we can actually make adjustments to within the statute, but there are several more things that cannot be fixed without having a statute change, which again leads back to my point about the legislature in 2017 needs to take this on and fix it. It can't be done within the structure we have right now, which is in DWRS. Last point, number 6, is that referring to Moore, they have been doing a survey for some time of their membership to try and get a feel for what they're seeing with respect to the change in waiver rates. And they focus primarily on the DD waivered people. That's a large population that should be representative of the overall. And they're seeing an overall rate reduction of about 13.5%, 13.4 or whatever, 13.6. So whether you take the 13.6% or you take the 9.2%, it doesn't matter. Those are both too big a numbers to accommodate with with what we have going on. So anyway, our team at MNFAC has really come to this statement at the very end. We've thought a lot about this and changed it many times to reflect that we think it's accurate. DHS thinks it's inflammatory, which tells me that they finally got the message. They're listening. But they wouldn't be criticizing us unless they actually looked at this thing. But we have the opinion that DWRS is probably the largest and most imminent threat to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in Minnesota. Many residential and day services providers will not be able to survive if it stays the way it is. DHS has created yet another overly complicated and expensive system to administer rates that are not proactively communicating the real facts and not honoring the commitment to budget neutrality. That's a lot in there, but we feel that's a very accurate statement, and it's, it's very compelling. Okay, so what have we been doing lately? We have been trying to get together with two things. We've been trying to really get together with DHS and talk about this a little bit more. We've also been trying to get meetings with legislators. And I want to talk a little bit about what we've done there. We met with, first senator we want to talk to is Jim Abler from Anoka County. He has been, as well as John Hoffman, I think John is he not here tonight? I don't think he's here tonight, but have been really instrumental in trying to drive change and to, even the last session, tried to really put a floor in DWRS, and they weren't listened to, they didn't get any further with it, but Abler's probably been one that's been very strong. He's also a GOP in the GOP party, but very strong about trying to support people with disabilities. So we met with him on September 21st in his office up in Anoka. And he gave us a lot of pointers, but the three things he said I thought I'd relate to you is number one, parents and family members would be listened to a lot more than service providers. The service providers are always going to be regarded as having a special interest around surviving and getting through DWRS, in spite of the fact that we do know them pretty well, to know that they're really watching out and want to provide great services to our loved ones. But Jim Abler said, you are the closest to the people who are going to be affected. You will be listened to a lot more than service providers, so really you do have a voice. You have a lot more opportunity to have a voice. He secondly said DHS has created really a big mess here. He was very disappointed. He's actually one of the people that tried to support DWRS when he was in the House back when this was created, and he kind of regrets that now based on what has really happened here. We talked to him about, should we get some petitions going and things like that. He said, basically now on the internet, people can write petitions easily and get things done that way. They don't get read. People just don't look at it anymore because there's so much an opportunity to make a petition about anything. He said what you really should do is get about 20 legislators to line up behind this thing. Get them all to support you talking to the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee when that committee is announced who the chair is going to be and who the members are going to be. And try and get a formal hearing with that Health and Human Services Committee with DHS in the room, with parents and so forth, to try and blow this thing up and see if we can't get some more action from the Health and Human Services Committee. So that's kind of our approach at this point in time, is getting those names. We probably have about halfway to that point. So that's one of the things I'm asking for. If you contact your legislator and they want to line up behind this thing, and you worked or talked about the fact sheet with them and talked about your own personal situation, especially knowing what your rates are going to be based on RMS, and I think you told me you're going to talk about that later, that's an opportunity to have a discussion with them and get an audience with them. And if you get some favorable pushback on that or favorable consideration, please let me know. Let MinFact know so we can add them to the list of senators and representatives we need to be hand in hand with when we finally go into a Health and Human Services Committee. So that is basically what we're trying to do, is go that approach, and that's kind of the side of the legislature process. We've also been trying to get some attention to DHS. I've had a number of meetings, as mentioned already, with bringing DHS people to forum meetings with parents at primarily Merrick. We had one meeting at a church, but over the course of 2015, and let parents decide from there what actions are required, or at least learn from what's going on there. So from that then, there has been a new assistant commissioner appointed by the name of Claire Wilson. And she actually was interested in meeting with us, hearing the story, and so we had a really good meeting with her on September 29th. And we had a very good discussion. There were really about three things that came out of that meeting I thought I'd relate. Is number one, she said that nobody in DHS wants to see service providers put out of business, especially day services. Nobody. And I thought, well, that's refreshing. Let me hear more. What else is behind that? She does not argue with the fact that those reductions I mentioned, the study and so forth, that sometimes they want to argue their own numbers, but in this case it didn't. But she said that they expect the service providers to come up with more innovation and some new business models to be able to adjust to that 9.2% or whatever the number is going to be. She thinks it's not going to be quite as dramatic, but still, I mean, the numbers are there. It's her own report. I don't know how new business models and innovation and just trying harder is going to cover 9.2% or maybe even 13.5%, whatever the number is going to be. It's just not there for me. It's got to be something totally different. So that's why I was confused by that and told her that, but she said, no, I really think that you just have to have the service providers try harder and see what they can do to come up with that kind of savings in their P&L. She went on to say, this was very interesting, that DWRS, we're characterizing it as a crisis, and I think it is a crisis. She said, I don't think so. I think it's more like we're in transition here, which made me think, well, does that mean that there's some adjustments coming? She didn't say that either, but again, I had a difficulty with that, hearing that, and then the facts that what we have out in front of us don't suggest that it is a transitional thing. It's a crisis. It's going to really put people out of business, and a lot of our people with loved ones with disabilities are not going to have a program to go to, or will have a less of a program to go to, or something else with that. So she still was quite confident on that. She did say that the healthcare workforce crisis is a crisis, and she feels that will definitely require legislative input and change there. But she said that's going to be a $900 million bill to fix the healthcare crisis. $900 million. I was shocked by that number, but that's what she claims is going to be to fix that. And they are not pushing that. In fact, they've already submitted their tentative or proposed budget for 2017 legislative process. And there's nothing in there about the healthcare crisis. Nothing. The only thing they had, and she said this to me, in fact, Alex Bartalik told me this on October 5th, that the only thing they had in there, this kind of new money or additional money, is the new employment programs that are rolling out that are inside of HCBS, another topic we won't get into tonight, but otherwise, DHS did not have anything on the slate in terms of additional money to fix DWRS or to treat anything else other than the employment programs. The third thing was interesting as well. I've been talking to them for a long time about need for more communication. There are some advisory councils and so forth, but they're multidisciplinary. You have representatives around a big table, these advisory councils or state quality councils from all walks of life, the service providers and other places. There are a few parents in there, parent or family members in there, but the technical jargon and the mixed agendas and so forth, nothing really happens in those that I can tell. They're tangential issues they're looking at, and they're not really going to the heart of what I think we need to change. So I said we've got to have some sort of a council, some sort of a advisory council that's exclusively for parents and family members and self-advocates. So we don't get confused with all these other disciplines around the room. And she agreed with that. She said, yes, you're right. And they are working on something. I don't know what it's going to be, but they did. That's the one thing they did promise to do, is put together some sort of advisory council for parents and family members exclusively. So if that happens, hopefully we'll get something out, and if anybody wants to be part of that, just to let us know. That should be a lot of fun. Might be a lot of work, I don't know. Hopefully it's meaningful. I just hope it's not a smoke screen and we get another diversion away from the real topics. I don't know. So we'll see. Another meeting we had was recently, it was October 18th in Merrick. Merrick organized a meeting. I was a leader of that meeting, and we were invited like 4 or 5 local legislators to that meeting. We got 2 to actually show up, Jason Isaacson and also Peter Fisher. And Jason Isaacson is actually in the House right now, but he's running for Senate, much like what Abler did in his history. And both of them were very positive about, they didn't know much about DWRS and asked a lot of questions. In fact, I happen to have a copy of the actual statute, so they can read that as well. But especially Jason Isaacson has come back and said, hey, I want to sign on, I want to help you guys. And he's actually been trying to arrange some meetings for us to try and talk some more with the people that are in charge of this stuff. So I'm kind of excited about that. But he also asked us to put together a very clear list of what we want, which we've done, and that's working, I think, okay at this point in time. We'll see where it goes. But again, the story there is every legislator I've talked to, and I've probably talked to half a dozen now, Roger Chamberlain being the other one, when I started to ask them, do you know what you did in 2013, especially incumbents, obviously, they say, well, what? No, not really. What was it? And I talk about what was passed in 2013 and what was inside it called DWRS, and they say, well, tell me more. And by, then I pull out my one-pager on DWRS that you have in front of you, and all of a sudden, really? They really get very interested in either decide to run away from it or they really want to be part of the solution. I think this is crazy. This is just untenable what's going to happen. So I'm hoping you have the same reaction as if you take the time to do it, that your representatives that you talk to will get excited about the potential here of fixing something that's really wrong. Just a little bit about my own story. In Bob's case, my son Bob is in a center-based DTH. He goes 5 days a week. He does some light assembly and packaging. He loves it. When he went through transition, he worked in 3 or 4 different community-based employment settings. He didn't care for it. He was not safe. He likes to work hard, but he just didn't care for being in a community-based setting. He was a dishwasher at Countryside Restaurants, which is a wonderful place, and of course it's closed down now, but they were wonderful to him, but he was a dishwasher. He never saw the light of day. So when people talk about community-based employment as being integrated to typical people, it's not exactly that. I mean, being in the back room, washing dishes all day, doesn't tell me it's more integrated than being where he is now in a center-based setting. He is doing some more work with mobile work crews. Someday, perhaps they get into supported employment services. We'll see. That would be great. But at this point in time, I'm honoring his choice to do what he's doing, and he's doing a great job of it. His rates are going down by 21%. He's going from and this is all the RMS snapshots that we'll go through, but he's going from like $72 a day down to $57 a day. And the aggregate of all that to Merrick is about a $900,000 reduction in revenue for the 375 clients that are in their program, or about a 14.2% reduction in revenue. Untenable. They cannot withstand that. On October 12th, at that meeting, John Wayne Barker said as much to the parents. I'm not trying to scare you to death. This is real. We cannot operate our business. We cannot operate our workshop. We cannot operate our employment DTH with this kind of reduction. It won't happen. It's just not going to be here. So He couldn't have been more clear about what's going to happen there. So obviously I'm very concerned about my own son. What's he going to do with that situation? So there's many other stories. I've got several parents that have done the RMS. Some people are getting some increases, maybe 15%, but 80% plus are getting reductions. Even at the residential level, it's not quite as dramatic, but in the residential services, some people are seeing some increases and many are seeing some decreases. So that is also very alarming and very concerning as well, what's going to happen with the residential setting, especially in the metropolitan area. So, just going to wrap up with the two things that I asked you to do is really just two things, is to continue learning about this subject. If you've got your interest in this kind of heightened and great, but there's also a need to act. This is definitely out of the comfort zone for many of us, and we've got to do something with this and not let this wash over us. Several things to do in terms of learning if you want to learn more. Access Press is really a great paper. It comes out every couple of weeks or so. It's a good vehicle. VOR is a national advocacy group that I've really found to be very useful. It's like $40 a year to subscribe to it. They give you a weekly email in addition to this quarterly paper and newsletter. But they're fantastic. It's VOR.org. The Minnesota's Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities, Colleen Wick, she was actually in his room some time back and spoke to us. Another great resource. The other one is stay close to your case manager. A lot of the case managers don't know anything about DWRS, or very little. I think it's kind of consciously be done by DHS not to tell them too much. And it's unfortunate, but you need to, in some cases, talk to your case managers and then teach them, have them learn more about this so you can actually have a better conversation and time with them about what's coming down the pipe. I think even the DHS websites are actually pretty informative. All the facts that I gave you come off the DHS website. If you take the time to go through it and use Google and so forth, it's there. In terms of action, then, these screenshots are very important. I think the two things, if you had in your hand to go talk to a legislator, would be that fact sheet I gave you and your screenshots about your own personal situation. You get all the ammo you need right there to go talk to anybody about what's going on and the fact that you're not in favor of the cuts that DWRS is going to deliver. I think I'd like to have any of you who are interested sign up for Impact. We are simply a mailing list at this point in time. We communicate to our members and try and train people or teach them a bit. We're still getting organized. We're still getting our legs underneath this. And there's an invitation letter that hopefully is part of your handouts to do that. There's an address to send your name to. And we'll try and use that to publish more information and provide more education. Absolutely contact your legislators. You can find them by going to the Secretary of State website and plug in your address and you get who they are if you don't know who they are already. This is actually a good opportunity to find out for those that are running for office, what's their position? And see if they have any clue what's going on, and maybe they need to be, again, trained a little bit about what's going on. If you're looking for a letter, ARC has a very good letterhead form to fill out in terms of communicating or writing an email to a legislator about what your situation is, and that's a great resource to use. The last thing I'd say is also take advantage of these public comment periods. There are actually 4 public comment periods open right now that would be worth thinking about trying to input your information. The first one is HCBS, Home and Community-Based Services Waiver Setting, Final Rule, has got a public comment period open for the state transition plan that Minnesota's been writing forever to try and get CMS to approve it. It's got several things in there that are interesting. One thing that I'm very alarmed about in that HCBS transition plan is they are going to decouple, unbundle employment from center-based DTH programs or DTH programs. And they're going to have this 3 new employment programs. All that sounds pretty good, but I think what's behind the scenes on that, my personal opinion, they're going to take out employment from center-based DTH facilities and have only community-based employment, but they're going to fund with the waivers. And it's not clear on that, but I think that's what's behind the curtain on this one. The second one, Minnesota waiver amendments. are also up for review, and they're also have a public comment period open at this point in time for about 1 month. I think it ends in the first week of November. Case management services redesign has also got a public comment period, so we're looking at that and making your comments there. And the last one I just read about today is the Olmsted Plan. There's 39 measurable goals. There's about 5 categories for those measurable goals that they want to have some input on around person-centered planning, transition services, housing and residential services, employment, and then lifelong learning and education. I think the 2 that really concern me are the housing and residential services piece, as well as we've talked about already is employment and what they have in mind there. So that's an opportunity as well to at least weigh in on those things. Take a, read them and put your comments in through email or the 2 different ways they have. They have a format online to do that, but that's worth looking at as well in terms of action. But I still circle back. I think DHS is going to ignore us and push us off and not want to do anything unless they're ordered to the legislative session 2017. So I really would, if anything at all, I'd recommend that you take the time to find out who your representatives are, let them know what you think about DWRS and what the rates are going to change for your loved one, and get a discussion going with them about what's going on, so they might have a chance in the 2017 session of getting behind this thing and fixing DWRS. Okay? Any questions, comments? You in shock? Wish this would go away? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Again, my name is Tony Quirk. I'm with PAI, and what I'd like to do, as Jim alluded to, is draw your attention to the single handouts that you got when you came in. You either got a white copy, which should be specific to the person in your loved one or person that you represent. And for those of you that we do not have those, you have a blue copy to follow along, and that's just a generic copy at this point. And I'll also be showing that up on the screen. I'm just going to get that loaded up here quickly. Okay, so as Jim said, the Disability Waiver Rate System is the system that we're currently under, and in a banding period, or those protection periods, until 2019. And that algorithm is the rate management system, or the RMS, and that's what you have in front of you. It's called a screenshot. And what I want to do is just walk you through that. It can be a little maybe overwhelming, and also if you're not tightly knit in this world, with which I don't know if any of us really are, but we're trying to wrap our heads around what this exactly means. So I want to just walk you through those. And I want to start with just pointing you out a few things. So up at the top on the right-hand corner there, where you see the yellow average staffing ratio, that's the ratio of staff to the person being served that has been designated for that person, typically by the team based on a number of factors and needs that that person has. Then if we move down the page, the other critical areas I'm going to point to are going to be at the lower right-hand part of your page, where you see historic rate, an RMS rate, and a final rate. So for a person that, let's just say my example is for a person that's being served at a 1-to-7 ratio, if we take a look at the historic rate, that rate of 107 in this example, it's 107.89,
was the daily rate that this individual received to purchase services in 2013, before all of this went into place. So that's their historic rate, okay? Once the DWRS and the rate management system went into effect, we see an RMS rate of 5909, and that is the rate that the individual will be receiving to purchase service when the protections come off after 2019. The final rate is the adjustment period. So between the 2014 and 2019, we've got these adjustment periods that Jim alluded to, where agencies are supposed to reinvent themselves and come up with some creative money off of money trees or whatever we have to do to figure out how we're going to serve individuals at the rate that they'll come in saying that they have to be able to purchase services. So during these next years up until 2019, this individual right now it's a real individual that's being served in a program, and their final rate right now that they bring in to be able to purchase services from a day service provider is the $106.81. If all things remain the same and we don't get legislators behind us to change legislation and look at those buckets and make sure that all the money that's supposed to be spent is being spent, then this person's rate management system rate will be $59.09. So they'll be able to go out and talk to day programs and say, okay, I've got $59.09 to purchase services, what can I get? Yes?
Going back to the historic rate, so DTNH providers right now are site-based rate structures. In other words, everyone that comes to your site is paying the same rate. So this basically is a snapshot of going to an individual in compliance to the requirements of CMS. So when you say the historic rate, it's really that everyone that attends your Wayfair Avenue site, let's say, whatever the case is paying that rate. So I think that's one thing that parents need to understand too, that everybody that's going to a site right now, regardless of the needs of the individual, are paying the same rate. So these snapshots are really looking at, pricing out, let us say, and going to more individual rate structure. Is that correct?
Correct. It'll be individual rate structure, not site-based, as Jim had talked about earlier on, that we're site-based and out of compliance with CMS and need to go to individual need-based funding.
Right.
Anybody else? Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next slide then, and this slide will show an individual who being served in a program at a 1-to-3 ratio. And for this individual, the historic rate, or the rate that they were getting to receive services in 2013 was $135.05. So again, for your loved one on your white sheets, you can see what that rate actually was in 2013. And then the final rate, I'm going to skip over that RMS rate because that's the end game. The final rate, again, is that $132.71, which is the rate that the provider is currently getting to provide services for that person at a 1-to-3 ratio. And then finally, the RMS rate will be the rate that the provider would be at, or that the individual would get to be able to purchase services from a provider once the protections are off. So for the other thing that I wanted to just point out on here is that for this individual, in order to purchase services, then with that $114.05, that would be a reduction of about 15% for that individual. And the impact to that person is about $19.96, about $20 less a day that they have to purchase services. And that translates to about $4,990 annually less that that individual will have to purchase services.
I have a question.
Sure.
the staffing ratio, is that the driver?
That is one of the drivers, yeah.
One of the drivers. What's some of the others?
I might need to ask some of my colleagues to help me out on that one.
Transportation, whether the person uses a lift vehicle, whether they need a lift vehicle, and the number of miles that is, and that's, you can see that kind of in the middle of the sheet, the average number of one-way trips, the number of miles per day, that's one of the drivers.
Okay.
How far they're going and whether they're using lift vehicles. Lift vehicles that are needed and used, and usually if they're needed, they're used, there's a higher transportation rate. This year, for the first time, the transportation rate used to be a set rate for all providers too, just like the program rate was. And now this year, for the first time, when we plug numbers into those areas, and these are all done by your program directors, so that's who's filling these out. Well, they don't fill this out, but they give the information to the county, and the county puts it into this system. But this year, for the first time, when you put that piece of information in, it comes up with a set number. So if you're 20 miles away, you use a lift, and you need a lift, well, you can probably figure it out, whatever it says up there, 2816 or whatever, that's the rate that, yes, however miles that is that 20 miles round trip?
If I get rid of the variables,
You get rid of the rate. You can't build a rate without those variables.
yeah, but I'm looking for, I need a constant. If the rate is 1 to 5,
Yeah, the ratio.
is that across the board? Forget about the variables. Do you understand what I'm asking?
I'm not sure.
So what you're saying is your beginning point, let's say, is the staff ratio,
Right.
3, 1 to 5, 1 to 7, 1 to 9, and then basically through the course of developing and plugging in, so to speak, how that I think is what Suzanne's trying to say too, that really is the beginning point, the driver through the different variables.
Okay.
Right. So this same person everything was the same and they changed that staffing ratio, that rate would change.
Right.
Yeah.
But would it change for everybody at that staffing ratio, forgetting about the variables? That's what I'm asking. Is it constant?
So you're asking if you and I are both assessed at a 1 to 5 ratio and we get rid of all those other variables, will you and I receive the same number of dollars to go purchase
That's
service?
what I'm asking.
At one program you will. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you explain those numbers at the bottom again?
Sure, there's
Mine
one to go.
has a historic rate of 0.
Okay, so look up at the top for me, and there's some of you have a DTNH daily, it says, and some of you have a DTH daily and a DTNH 15-minute. And so if you have a 15-minute, really what we haven't billed in increments of 15 minutes before, so there is no historic rate to plug in for that. So the middle number that you see, that RMS rate, is probably something like $2 and some odd cents per 15 minutes. So if an individual came into the service, in the morning at 8 and left at 10 for an appointment and came back and they had the remainder of the day and then a few 15-minute increments at the end, a half hour or whatever, then they just combine those two, the daily and the hourly rates. So we haven't billed that way before, and this is a new way of billing, is in those 15-minute increments.
Will everybody be doing that then? Will that be the standard of billing in 15-minute increments? Or just some people being assigned that?
We'll be able to bill both full day and 15-minute increments.
The other reason you could have a historic rate of 0 is if they weren't in the program in 2013. So if somebody has just, if they were there, then and if it's a 15-minute billing, that's why you see that. But new students, young people that weren't part of the day services, they come in, their historic rate is developed in a different way because they weren't there. They literally weren't there in 2013. So there's a whole nother system on how they come up with what that historic rate is for those people.
So I'm still not understanding though because it's zero, then the RMS is really low, that 240.
So your historic rate on your sheet is 0, and then your RMS rate is
244.
Yeah, and so the 244 in 2019, 2020, if none of this changes, that will be a rate that if they're only there for an hour and 15 minutes, it'll be billed, that 15-minute increment will be charged the $2 or $3, whatever cents. Does that make sense?
The final rate, what is that?
The final rate is what they are receiving to purchase services today. So in the wherever your loved one attends, that day program receives that rate right now when they bill, and there is no 15-minute increment right now. Once we get to the 2019, 2020, then both of them will come into play. Does that help?
Yeah, this rate is still really low.
Yeah, I think that that was one of the, what Jim so eloquently pointed out is that, some individuals literally, if you look at it in aggregate, 9 or 13%, that's bad. But if you look at individuals that are going from 125 down to 50, and they're going out into the marketplace and saying, I've got $50 to purchase services, when before they had 125. And that's what would happen in 2019, 2020 if nothing changes. That would be the rate that your loved one would get to purchase services.
Does the final rate include the transportation?
Yeah, the final rate, yes, does include transportation. Any other questions? Okay, so as Jim said, the fact sheet that you have in your packet, and particularly those of you that have the white sheets that are seeing what your loved one's rate could go to, those are the two real critical things that if you're going to meet with legislators, talk with legislators, those are the pieces of paper that you want to take with you to be able to reference. And with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Jennifer.
I have a question for Jim. I want to thank you for your presentation, first of all, and for all the work you've done. And then I'm not seeing in here a talking sheet. When I talk to my legislators, usually I've got a talking sheet of points, and that helps me to know what the key issues are, etc. And I'm not seeing that, that makes it easy for me to talk to the legislators.
But this is the disability waiver rate setting. September 25th is a fact sheet. Yes, I think that would be, ammunition that you need to talk to the legislator, plus your own story with your snapshots or your screenshots about what the rate reduction is going to be.
I think this needs to be more simple. I think people like me, I'm fairly experienced at talking to legislators, but I would have a hard time doing it from this. So anyway, that's a request that to try to get this in more like talking points so that it's simpler.
Well, the talking point for me is the very bottom paragraph in that sheet.
Okay.
The very bottom in bold. It's going to put these service providers out of business. My son or daughter, sister, brother, whatever, is not going to have services likely to be able to go through during the day. The system is broken. It's going to be fixed by the 2017 legislature. Yeah.
Thank you.
The very bottom paragraph of that sheet. I take your point. I'll think about that, but otherwise.
other thing is, I think those of you here tonight, if something like that would be helpful, feel free, if your loved one comes to Northeast, you and I could work together on some talking points, and I think each agency is happy to help their own consumers and family members do that and partner together for the advocacy work. Just to give you a little bit of framework from one provider's perspective, I've been doing some analysis on this to see what it means overall for people who come to Northeast Contemporary. And when I looked at all the screenshots, the very lowest reduction that I saw was $2.67 a day, and the highest one I've seen so far is a reduction of $23.49 per day, and the average is $12.64 per day. And I've only seen 6 increases out of 120 people served. One of them, I think, was because that person was at a 1-to-4 ratio, and it seems like that's kind of that threshold where when you were bringing up that how the ratio impacts the algorithm, I think that's really anything above a 1-to-4. It's kind of you're seeing a decrease. And then transportation affects it a little bit, as Suzanne was saying, but otherwise every single one of our people that we're working with is seeing a decrease. So anyhow, I'd just like to thank Mr. Clapper again for being here tonight and sharing his time and knowledge and passion with us. In your handouts, there's a resource list, and there's a website there that you can go to look up who your legislators are for your own district. There's also website addresses for MORE, which is the Minnesota Organization for Habilitation and Rehabilitation that we're all members of. There's also the website for the Department of Human Services. There's a link if you'd like to read the full 75-page report that the legislature put out on the DWRS in January of 2016. So hopefully between those resources and the handouts that Mr. Clapper put together, we hope those are some helpful tools for you. And again, please do reach out to us if we can help partner as you talk to your legislators. And as Mr. Clapper said, yours are really the voices that are going to be listened to. So we hope that you can make your voices heard. And on the last page of your handouts, there's a survey. We'd appreciate you taking time to fill that out so we can learn about your experiences and what would be helpful to you moving forward in future forums that would be helpful. And just thanks again for being here tonight. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. And the staff that are here are happy to stay if you have individual questions about your loved one's screenshots or any other questions we can answer. Thank you. Have a good evening.